Today I'm going to show you how to make a fish bone broth. It can be ready in about 45 minutes. It's high in protein and it's rich in iodine, which is wonderful for supporting good thyroid health. Hi sweet friends, I'm Mary and welcome back to Mary's Nest, where I teach traditional cooking skills for making nutrient-dense foods like bone broths, sourdough, ferments, and more. So if you enjoy learning about those things, consider subscribing to my channel and don't forget to click on the little notification bell below. That'll let you know every time I upload a new video. Well, if you've been following along with me for a while now, you know we've had a lot of fun making beef bone broths and chicken bone broths, and now I want to share with you how to make fish bone broth, which is wonderfully delicious and nutritious and can be made in about 45 minutes. And fish bone broth has some wonderful properties because not only is it rich in protein, it's rich in iodine, and iodine is wonderful for nourishing our thyroid. And fish bone broth is very tasty, so you can drink it just warm out of a mug, or you can use it as a base for a clam chowder. It's wonderful for that, or any type of fish chowder, or any type of fish soup. It's the perfect base, so it gives wonderful flavor, plus high protein nutrition, plus the iodine. So fish bone broth is a wonderful bone broth to have in your culinary repertoire. Now the first thing you want to do is get out a nice big stock pot because we're going to make fish bone broth on the stove top. You don't need a slow cooker, you don't need anything fancy, just a nice big pot and your stove top. And all you want to do is put a little bit of fat, some type of fat that you like cooking with. I've got ghee in here, about a tablespoon worth. You can use butter, you can use coconut oil, olive oil, anything that you like. Basically, we're just putting a little bit of fat in there just to help saute the vegetables and prevent burning. So you want to set your burner just onto a medium heat and let the fat that you're using melt down. And you're going to want to have about 2 stalks of celery chopped, and you can have all the greens and whatnot. And if you've got vegetable scraps from celery and onion skins and carrot scraps, you can use that too. And you just want the equivalent of about 2 chopped celery stalks, 2 carrots. They're not peeled, they're just chopped. And here I've got 3 onions. My onions were a little small. You could just use 2 onions if they're big. Again, just what I've done is I've sliced them in like this, just into little coin shapes, because we're just going to kind of make a bed that we're going to put the fish bones on top of. And so I haven't quartered them the way I do normally when I'm making a beef bone broth or a chicken bone broth. And I've got my onions were a little small, so I've got about 3 onions here. Then I've just got, a little small handful of peppercorns. This is not an exact science, so don't worry. You've got 4 onions, 3 onions, 3 celery stalks, 3 carrots, 2 carrots. It's very, very flexible. And then, of course, my signature 1 bay leaf. Well, my ghee is melted, so what I'm going to do is go ahead and put all of my onions and my carrots and my celery and the peppercorns and the bay leaves into this stock pot, and we're just going to saute these for no more than 5 minutes, just to start releasing some of the flavor. But we don't want to get any color. We don't want to get any color on the onions or any of the vegetables at all. Now while that's simmering, and we're just going to let those vegetables simmer for about 5 minutes, go ahead and fill another stock pot with water, bring it up to a boil, and then turn it off and just keep it covered so that you have some nice hot water ready. And I'll show you what we're going to do with that. And the reason that we're going to need this is when we get ready to add the water to make the fish bone broth, we want to add hot water. We don't want to add cold water. Now I've got about 5 pounds of fish bones here. Now you may be wondering, where do you get fish bones? And what you're going to want to do is go to your fishmonger at the fish counter at your grocery store or your specialty grocery store and ask them, do they sell fish bones? And chances are they will have some in the back. They're not probably going to have them on the front counter, but they might have them in the back. And they're usually very reasonable. I paid less than $10 for all of this. And what I did was I went to the Whole Foods grocery store And I said to the fishmonger, do you have any fish bones? And he said, yes, I have them in the back. And then he went in the back and got them for me. And this was halibut. Now, I also want, these are fish bones from, this over here is fish bones from halibut. And I also wanted some fish heads. And unfortunately, they didn't have any, but they were selling some whole fish. They had red snapper. And I asked the fishmonger, well, could I buy the whole fish and then you can fillet it for me? And he was exceptionally nice and said, oh, I'll fillet it and I'll just sell the fillet separately to someone else if you don't want them. And I'll just sell you the fish head with the bones. And that's what he did. And again, this was, as I said, altogether, this was about $10. And this cost next to nothing. The reason is you want to find a fish head is because the fish heads are what are going to bring a lot of gelatin to your final product, your final fish bone broth. And as you know, I always like to try to make my bone broth, whatever type I'm making, very gelatinous, because it's that gelatin that we're looking for to nourish our gut. Now, something that I want to bring to your attention about the fish head is that you want to make sure that the gill is removed. And that looks like this is removed, so I don't have it to show you, but the piece would be right here, and it would be kind of a very deep color, deeper than the color of the flesh or the outside of the fish. And the fishmonger at Whole Foods removed that for me. And the reason you want to remove the gill is because it can put a bit of an off flavor into your fish bone broth, and you wouldn't want that. Now, the next step we're going to take in making our fish bone broth is that we want to sweat our bones. It's sort of the equivalent of when we are roasting our beef bones or our chicken bones. But instead of roasting them in the oven, we're going to sweat them right in our stock pot. And allowing for them to sweat for about 10 or 15 minutes allows the protein, the collagen, to start being released from the bones. So that's what I mean by sweating, to just basically we're steaming them, we're putting them on top of this layer of vegetables, our sort of mirepoix, our onions, our carrots, our celery, and we're just going to put them on there. And then we're going to add a little, I'm going to add white vermouth. You could also add any kind of dry white wine. This is about ½ cup is all you're going to need for the 5 pounds of fish bones. Or I know there are some of you have told me that you don't like to use a wine, you don't like to use a fortified wine. So yes, you could use vinegar, but what I would recommend is if using your apple cider vinegar and using only about a tablespoon and diluting that in a ½ cup of water, because you are going to need some liquid in here, but a ½ cup of vinegar would be way too strong and would give a very off-putting taste to your final product, especially since this is only going to take about 45 minutes to make. So that's really not going to give enough time to have that strong vinegar flavor evaporate. Alrighty, well, let's get started with this. So what we're going to do is we're just going to start taking our bones and we're going to start putting them right on top of those vegetables. And then we're going to go ahead and add in the white vermouth, and then we're going to put the lid on and let them simmer for about, or sweat for about 10-15 minutes. And as I'm adding these bones in, I just want to show you that there's still some wonderful meat on here. And this was not going to be discarded. As I said, we're just going to simmer this for a relatively short period of time and then pull off all this fish and use it to make a wonderful soup or a chowder. And now the piece de resistance, the fish head. Now I'm going to go ahead and add in my white vermouth, and then I'm going to remove my spoon. I'm going to put the cover on, and I'm just going to let those bones sweat for about 10 to 15 minutes. We'll check them, and I'll show you the white substance that you'll start seeing to leach out of the bones. Well, these bones have been sweating for about 7 minutes or so, and I just wanted to pull one out to show you what I'm talking about as the collagen starts to become the protein, which is in this case collagen, is starting to be released from the bones. And it's like a white substance. I took a picture and I'll overlay it so hopefully you can see what I'm talking about. But that's what you're looking for. You're going to see the bones starting to release some of some of their collagen, and it'll be sort of like a white, sort of very loose, little mushy, I don't know how to describe it, but look for it in the picture that I overlay. And what's nice about making fish bone broth is that you're getting the collagen that's being released from these bones, which is one type of protein, and then you're also getting the protein that is going to be released from the little bits of meat that have been left on the bone, and that's a different type of protein. And as I've explained, in videos where I talk about making beef bone broth, you have the protein that comes from the muscle meat, and then you have the protein that comes from the bones. What comes from the bones is collagen, and then what comes from the muscle meat is a different type of protein. But having the wonderful thing about bone broth is that it takes into consideration having all of a nice mix of proteins. You get some protein from the muscle meat and some protein from the bones as well, the collagen protein. Well, I've had my fish bone sweating here for about 10 minutes, and now I'm going to get ready to cover everything with the hot water. As you may recall, back in the beginning when we started this process, I told you to fill another stock pot with water and bring it up to a boil and then turn it off and just put a lid on to keep it warm. And the reason that we do that is we don't want to add cold water to the bone broth, to the fish bone broth, because it would take a long time to bring that up to a boil. And you don't want to overcook fish bone broth. You really just want to cook it for 30 to maybe 45 minutes, no longer than that. Because if you cook it longer than that, it can start to take on a little bit of an off flavor. So you want to add nice hot water, and that's what I've gotten here. And I'm just going to use this heat-proof measuring cup to start adding it in to cover my bones. And that's all that we want to do, is just add enough hot water to cover. And then we're going to bring this up to not quite a boil, very close to a boil, but just sort of kind of a high simmer. And at that point, we're going to skim the foam off that comes up to the top. But we really don't want to bring this up to a rolling boil, just kind of a little bit of a high simmer. And the reason is, again, fish bone broth is a very delicate bone broth. And if we bring it up to a hard rolling boil and then turn it down to low the way we do with the beef bone broth, it's almost just a little too much for it. And it can also create a very cloudy fish bone broth. And we kind of want to avoid that. We want to make it look as appetizing as possible. Well, I've got just enough water in here to cover, and I'll put in a photo and overlay it so you can see what I'm talking about. But basically, all you want to do is just cover the fish. No more water than that is necessary. Now, we're going to bring this up to a boil, and because we used hot water, it's already starting to show some bubbles. And I'll show you, and when I say bring it up to a boil, as I said, more of a high simmer. And I'm going to show you what I'm talking about when it gets to that point. Alrighty, well, I've brought this up to that high simmer that I'm talking about, and I'll overlay a picture or a video so you can see exactly what I'm talking about. And now what we want to do is we just want to go over this, and we want to start scooping off any of this foam here that comes to the top. And we're just going to go all around very gently, trying not to take too much of the liquid with us, and just get all this foam off, because that'll help. The foam just has some impurities and whatnot, and it also, by removing this, it helps the final product have a more clear appearance. Now I've turned this down to my lowest setting, and that's what you want to do. Just turn it down to the lowest setting you have on your stovetop. And if you have a thermometer, a cooking thermometer that can be submerged into liquid, you can check it at some point to make sure that it's simmering on a very low, on your very low setting at about 180 degrees Fahrenheit. And I think that's about 82 degrees Celsius. And don't worry if you don't have a cooking thermometer to check it. What you're looking for is basically, as I've shared with you in the beef bone broth videos, you want just a bubble, intermittent bubbles, very slowly. So like bloop, 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 like that. So that's what you're going to be looking for. So turn it down to low, and if you're working with a gas burner, it'll go down to low right away. But if you're working with an electric burner, you may actually want to transfer it to a different burner and set that burner at low, because sometimes it can take the electric burner a little time to come down to temp, and you don't want it to build up to a boil. Well, I've got this turned down to my lowest setting, and now I'm going to let it simmer uncovered for about 30 minutes, but no longer than 45 minutes. Well, I've had this simmering for a little over 30 minutes, and now I've turned it off, and I'm going to start straining out all of the fish bones and fish pieces and vegetables, and I'm just going to put everything in one bowl here. Well, I've removed all the bones with the bit of fish on it and the vegetables, and now we're going to get ready to strain this. Now, the way that I like to do this is I like to take a strainer like this, or you can use a colander if you've got one of those, and then I usually put this over another stock pot, but in this case I'm just going to put it over my large measuring cup here, which is glass, so you can see exactly what I'm doing. And then I like to take the strainer and line it with a flour sack towel. You can also use cheesecloth if you want, but those of you who've been with me for a while know that I love to use these flour sack towels because I can wash them and reuse them, and I've had these for years. They hold up beautifully. Now, before I line the strainer, I just want to mention that, as you'll see, it's a small mesh, but little particles could get through this, and that's why I line it with the flour sack towel. But someone mentioned to me, and I think it was in comments, about using a chinois. And a chinois, and that's a very good idea, a chinois is a conical shaped strainer, a cone shaped strainer. And it has a very, very fine mesh to it, if that's the right terminology, than this, much, much finer. And it really does strain out a lot of very small particles, so the end product is quite clear. And I think that's an excellent idea. So if you have a chinois, it's definitely worth using to strain out your broth, your bone broths, or your stocks or your broths, whatever you may be making, and will save you the process of just using a traditional strainer and some sort of flour sack towel or cheesecloth. So if you have a chinois, that's an excellent way to go about straining all of this. Alrighty, well, let me get ready and cover this strainer with the flour sack towel. And now all we're going to do is just start to take our broth, our fish bone broth, and strain it through this lined sack, and I'll show you this lined sack, this lined strainer with the flour sack towel, and then I'll show you all the little pieces that I catch, and you'll understand why I like using this. So this is everything that I'm able to strain out of it, so you can understand why I enjoy using these flour sack towels to strain the broth, the fishbone broth. And you'll see we have this lovely, lovely color. And this is already over 8 cups, and I still have a whole bunch more to strain. Now, when it comes to storing my bone broth, I like to use these half-gallon mason jars or canning jars. And I use these if I'm going to store my bone broth in the refrigerator, and I think I'm going to use it up within 2 or 3 days. So you've probably, if you've seen my beef bone broth videos, you see that I store it in these type jars because my husband and I tend to drink it for breakfast, and we usually can finish a jar like this in a couple of days. And with my chicken bone broth, I tend to store it in containers like this. These are little, I think they're called the French jelly jars, something like that, or French working glass jars. I'm not exactly sure, but it's a very thick glass, and I'll often store my chicken bone broth in here because we don't usually drink chicken bone broth. I save it for making soups, sauces, and gravies. And so this is about a 2-cup size, and I'll store 2 cups of chicken bone broth in here, and then I'll put this plastic lid on top, and then I'll store this in my freezer. And I like using these because I generally always leave plenty of headspace so that when the chicken bone broth does freeze, it has plenty of room to expand, but just in case it didn't have enough room to expand, this top will just, boop, it just kind of pops off like that. And there's no breakage or anything like that. At least I've never had that happen to me. I've had some folks tell me that they do store their chicken bone broth in canning jars. I've never done that before, but they said they've had success using wide mouth canning jars, and again, leaving plenty of head space. Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the one that's here in this glass jar, in the glass measuring cup. I'm going to store that in this glass half-gallon jar because I'm going to be using this, this much, 8 cups worth. It's a little more than 8 cups. I'm going to be using this to make a fish stew. So I'm going to go ahead and just store this right in here because I'll be using this within a day or two. I'm just going to let this cool a little, and once it's cooled, I'm going to put this plastic lid on, just a plain plastic storage lid that fits on top of these Mason canning jars, and then I'll put this in my refrigerator, and it'll be ready for me when I'm ready to use it in a day or two. Now I'm going to continue to strain the rest of the fish bone broth, and I'm going to store the remainder in these French jelly jars, and I'm going to refrigerate. I'm going to freeze these so that they're ready for whenever I want to make a soup or a chowder or so on and so forth. Well, I finished straining all the broth, all the fish bone broth, and this is what I want to show you. See, this is everything that I collected in the flour sack towel, and that's why I really like to use this method. And look at all this glorious fish bone broth that we got from just a bunch of bones with a little bit of fish on them and one fish head. So for about $10, you know, a little bit more counting the vegetables, but even so, you have a half a gallon here, and then all of these jelly jars filled with bone broth as well, fish bone broth. And what's so wonderful, you can use this, so wonderful about this is that you can use this to make any kind of chowder or soup. You can use this as your base, and you can just drink this. I've got a little on the side here. We'll take a taste test because this is so good and so rich in nutrients. It's high in protein, and it also contains iodine, which is something that's nice about fish bone broth as opposed to beef and chicken bone broth. So it really nourishes your thyroid, which needs the iodine. Now I put a little bit in this glass, and I'm going to go ahead and put this in the refrigerator so we can see the consistency of the gelatinousness. I always laugh when I say that word. I don't know if it's really a word, but we'll see how gelatin the fish bone broth came. So I'm going to go ahead and put this in the fridge, but before I do that, and then I'll take it out in a few minutes or so, as much time as it needs to cool, and then we'll take a look at it. I'll show you how if it came gelatinous, and I think it did. Let's take a taste of this now. Oh my goodness, I don't even have any sea salt in here, and this is so tasty. Oh, it's got such a clean, it's not fishy at all. It just has a nice, clean seafood taste. I'm gonna take another taste. Yeah, just a nice seafood taste. That's delightful. This is gonna make such a wonderful soup, and or chowder for that matter. And this is something I could really drink as a regular beverage, the same way we drink beef bone broth. This is delicious. Well, I had this in the fridge, and it looks beautifully gelatinous. That fish head really makes a difference. Oh, look at that, see? Like Jell-O. I love when bone broths come like this. There you go, look at that. Oh, glorious. I'm so pleased with this, and I'll put a close-up picture. I'll overlay a close-up picture over this so that you can see it close up. If you'd like to learn more about traditional cooking, be sure to subscribe to my channel, and then click on this video over here where I have a playlist on how to make beef bone broth, chicken bone broth, and turkey bone broth. And I'll see you over there in my Texas Hill Country Kitchen. Love and God bless.